I'm a devoted member of the JCC community here. Both my kids went to the preschool here, and we love to be a part of anything we can do here, especially something as interesting and important as the topic here today. I'm going to start by introducing everybody else on the panel, and then we can jump right in. Jeffrey Goldberg is the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic and a recipient of the National Magazine Award for Reporting. He's the author of Prisoners, A Story of Friendship and Terror, which if you haven't read is fantastic. Prior to joining The Atlantic in 2007, Goldberg was a Middle East and Washington correspondent for The New Yorker. He's also written for the New York Times Magazine, New York Magazine, Jewish Daily Forward, and was a columnist for the Jerusalem Post, and I believe many of you saw him give his keynote here earlier today. Amos Harel is the senior defense correspondent for the Israeli newspaper Haaretz, who has covered Israeli security affairs for the last 20 years. He is the author or co-author of 3 books, including an Israeli bestseller and 2-time winner of the Chechik Award for Outstanding Security Research. In 2015, he received the Mogulof Prize, Israel's most prestigious recognition for excellence in journalism. Yonit Levi is the chief news anchor of Channel 2 Primetime News, the first woman in Israel to be appointed to the sole anchor position of a primetime newscast on a commercial channel. Previously, she also served as Channel 2's field reporter for such international stories as the 2000 tsunami in Japan, the US elections, and the wars in Gaza. Under Levy, the primetime news on Channel 2 has maintained its position as the most watched Israeli daily program. Dan Mogulof is the Assistant Vice Chancellor in UC Berkeley's Office of Communications and Public Affairs. Before Berkeley, Mogulof spent 20 years in broadcast journalism, during which he served as the CBS News bureau chief in Tel Aviv and was the recipient of 4 Emmys. A former member of Kibbutz Keturah, Mogulof serves as a member of the board of directors for Young Judea, the oldest Zionist youth movement in the United States. Nate Persily is the James B. McClatchy Professor of Law at Stanford University, a nationally recognized constitutional law expert who focuses on the law of democracy, addressing issues such as voting rights, political parties, campaign finance, and redistricting. Persily is the author of numerous articles on legal regulation and voting rights, and the editor of 3 books. Prior to joining the faculty at Stanford in 2013, Professor Persily was the Charles Keller Beekman Professor of Law and Professor of Political Science at Columbia Law School. Welcome to all of you, very distinguished crowd. I'd like to start with Yonit and Amos. I'd like to start by comparing the press's role in Israel and in the United States today. As Zach mentioned, we've recently seen President Trump try to threaten NBC after a report he didn't like. This is the kind of threat I know that my former colleagues at the Washington Post and elsewhere have feared since Inauguration Day. And I understand it's one that you know well in Israel. Yonit, what is the situation in Israel today? And for the rest of the panel, can you please talk about what you see that President Trump and Netanyahu have in common, and what are the differences when it comes to the press corps that covers them?
Well, first of all, I'd say that no matter what we're going to continue to say, I think the American press and the Israeli press are alive and kicking and doing an excellent job, whatever the attempts to control them or curb them are. Thank you. I will speak to what is happening in Israel in general, and I'm just going to say I believe that Netanyahu is a much more sophisticated operative when it comes to dealing with the media and deconstructing the media. He's been doing it for a very long time, and he's doing it in a very smart way. The first thing that he's doing is, of course, vilifying the media in general. One example would be standing up on primetime television in a speech and saying the Israeli media and the left is the same thing and they're both trying to topple me. And of course, when you say that, what you're actually saying is everything you hear on television is opinion, it's not facts. So it undermines what we actually do. And of course, he says wonderful things like the press is the industry of gloom, which I actually liked. It sounds like the next title for the J.K. Rowling book, right? Harry Potter and the Industry of Gloom. He's not wrong about that. But moreover, I mean, besides, attacking the media, which always works for your base, it works here and it works there, there are 2 other important things that he's doing. One is setting up or caring for your own news outlets. Of course, the best example is Israel Hayom, Sheldon Edelson's newspaper, or Channel 20, the media outlets that will be sympathetic to him. And this is also very important, trying to weaken any channel or any outlet that is not sympathetic to him. So the best example is what is going on now in Israel. In 2 weeks, the most popular channel in Israel, my channel, Channel 2, is about to break up, which makes me think I should probably be home right now and not here, but it's going to break up into 2 channels. The official reason for that is to encourage competition. The unofficial reason is that it would be easier to weaken all of the commercial channels in Israel by creating 3 instead of 2, and thus everyone being very economically dependent and weak. So I'm going back to the fact that I see in both countries the leaders who see that it's a great political asset to attack the press. It works wonderfully, but again, I think that it's not that Netanyahu is taking a page out of Trump's playbook, but rather Trump is taking a page out of Netanyahu's playbook. Netanyahu has been doing this rather successfully, and as I said, in a very sophisticated manner for the past 10 years.
Great.
Yes, but he did, I think, increase the efforts immediately after Trump won the elections. I think it was in Channel 2, there was Ilana Dayan, a colleague of Yonit, who had the first show of the year. It had to do with the Netanyahu administration and what wasn't working. And there was an immediate attack, if I'm not mistaken, it was immediately after the American elections, which was for the first time personal. It wasn't about business as usual. It was a very ugly, below-the-belt kind of attack against Dayan, who actually read the comment on live TV, on air for 5 minutes, and then at the end, I'll translate, she said, "What do I say now?" She said, "We don't say anything." And that was her response to the way Netanyahu reacted. And that was, you kind of felt that the Trump effect has arrived in Israel. I absolutely agree with Yonit that Netanyahu has been doing that for years. But actually, another one of Yonit's colleagues has quoted Netanyahu on TV saying to his advisors immediately after the Trump victory, saying, "Be like Trump. It's time to start behaving like the American president." And I think he is doing that even more so than before. And from his point of view, he has every justification to act this way. It's playing great with at least with most of his voters. And I think the people are more and more questioning how reliable the Israeli press is. Is it biased against Netanyahu? A lot of the same talk you hear here about the mainstream liberal media and so on, it goes on in Israel as well. And there are other attempts as well. Of course, the number one issue is what Yonit has mentioned about Channel 2. But there's also an attempt to create a mini Fox News network in Israel right now, which is a mouthpiece for Netanyahu. And I think that in 5 years' time, we'll see quite similar events and developments to what you already see in the States.
It's very interesting. So Jeffrey and Nate, perhaps I'll direct this to you. Although it may be more exaggerated today, it's not as though attacking the media is a new phenomenon that arose either under Netanyahu or Trump. This has been a tried and true tactic of all presidents, going back, well, at least to Nixon, but certainly in recent years. How natural was this evolution? How inevitable was this evolution to where we are today? And what is the path out, if there is one, for the media to either stand on its own or at least regain some of the confidence of the people who read it?
Well, I'll say, having been on a few panels like this, there are usually 3 kinds of objections you get. One is, what you think is new is actually old. The second is, what you think is bad is actually good. And the third is, what you think is original is something I've published on already. And I'll say that, so what's new here in terms of the threats to free speech or the changing in the media environment? Now, there's obviously a lot that we can talk about with this. Look, I think that I actually don't take, everyone said about Trump that you take him, the problem was that people took him literally instead of seriously or vice versa. These threats to free speech that are coming out of the tweets of the president are disturbing on many levels. I don't think you're going to see the kind of widespread suppression that he is suggesting. Nevertheless, it could have a chilling effect in the way certain media groups behave and the like. So that's concerning. In some ways, though, when it comes to the media and the sort of free flow of information, it's the best of times and the worst of times, right? So that we have more information from more outlets than at any time, you know, in human history. A lot of that information, of course, is propaganda. A lot of it is, you know, what ends up being called fake news and the like. What's happened is that the loss of the trust in media is parallel with all kinds of loss in trust in other institutions, right? So whether it's the government or corporations or unions, higher education, right? Everything, there's been a sort of loss of trust that's been punctuating the last few years, but it's been growing over time. Now, one thing that I think that we should highlight, though, is that there's this sense in which there is the media that is some identifiable institution these days. But part of the story of the evolution in the media ecosystem is that it's hard to figure out exactly what is, say, the media and everything else, right? Part of this is because of the platforms that sort of homogenize information and make it available sort of in a very egalitarian way, so you can't really distinguish between, say, the old legacy media and new media, or for that matter, if you look on Facebook, all of the information that you get is sort of packaged the same. So a video of your nephew's graduation, an article about Kim Kardashian, something from The Atlantic, or an opinion piece from Breitbart, right, all looks the same and is sort of communicated to you in the same way. Now, I think that when you're asking about what's sort of the hopeful signs here, this is where, and I know Facebook is making some inroads on this, is to try to distinguish among the different types of information, right? To bring credibility as you can, and bring some of the cues that we have in the offline world into the online world to sort of beef up the signals that are sent about some types of media as opposed to others.
I have not much to add to that. Very smart presentation, but I'll try nonetheless. On the question of inevitability, I don't think anything is inevitable. These are in the realm of human behavior, and humans have free will, and they can make their choices. And the President of the United States has made a set of choices. I talked about this earlier. I won't belabor the point, but these are norms that we're talking about. The only thing that holds you to a norm is your choice, your own personal choice to behave in a certain way, recognizing that behavior outside of the norm is going to have downstream negative consequences. So, you know, this is one of the biggest questions we have facing us as a country today is, you know, are we in a permanent slope of deterioration, or are we going to have a snapback when we get the next time there's a new president in 3 years or 7 years? Is that president going to adhere to the norms that have governed presidential behavior more or less until now? So, I mean, again, it comes down to, it becomes harder and harder to do that when you've opened up Pandora's box, but nevertheless, it is possible. Very briefly on the other question, you know, there is this strange reality TV quality, that's not surprising actually, reality TV quality to the quote-unquote war between Donald Trump and the media. And I said there's a reality TV quality in that everybody right now is sort of winning. I mean, he wins, he motivates his base, and he says these things, and he gets attention. We win because we've never had, this is not just true for The Atlantic, it's true for other legacy publications, we've never had this level of engagement that we have right now, with tens of thousands of new subscribers this year to print, which was supposed to be dead 10 years ago. You know, our web traffic, using the most common metric, unique visitors per month, we're at 40 million. And a lot of that is the Trump effect. A lot isn't, but a lot of that is. And so everybody seems to be benefiting in a kind of way, except, and here's the worry that I have. This is all non-tragic until a follower of Donald Trump or a follower of somebody else who demonizes the press on a regular basis decides to, in the Comet Pizza style, decides to go for direct action. When you call the press an enemy of the people, well, that could have consequences. And you know, I worry all the time about someone being hurt by a deranged or over-enthusiastic supporter of Donald Trump who takes to heart what I think Trump, in his deep cynicism, knows is shtick. Because he can't exist without the media. He loves the media, and that hatred of the media is just the way he expresses that in a kind of way. No, it's bizarre, and again, it has a reality TV quality that we haven't fully studied or understood.
So you mentioned Comet Pizza. I think most people here will recall this was there were stories. It's kind of the most vivid example, I think, of fake news that happened around the election time. There were stories that there was a child sex trafficking ring being run out of a pizza parlor in Washington, D.C., and it went viral. It spread on Facebook and other platforms, and sometime after it was discovered, a man went into the pizza shop and shot a gun. And fortunately, no one was hurt or killed, but could have happened, and I think that's what makes that such a legitimate worry. It's also why at Facebook, and I've been very involved in all of this, there's so much concern. I cannot begin to describe the degree to which is it being taken seriously, and we're wrestling with these questions about what is fake news, how do you allow a lot of speech for as many people, a lot of people who previously didn't have the capacity to, speak to many. And there've been a lot of disenfranchised people who've suddenly had a voice. How do you continue that and at the same time try to move aside illegitimate speech? And who should decide? Who gets to pick what's legitimate or illegitimate speech? Once you move
I'm sorry to interrupt you, and I don't mean to do this to you, but she knew I was going to do this.
Yeah.
Do you think you're wrestling hard enough or fast enough at Facebook?
I mean, almost certainly, I would say if we had wrestled hard and fast enough, we wouldn't be where we are today. I think now we are. I think before the election, 2015, 2016, we knew that there were security threats coming from foreigners and other actors, people who wanted to hack into people like you's, accounts. No one, I think, quite understood the information operations interference that was underway, in part because the behavior is identical to the behavior of regular people on the platform. And frankly, we have given over a bunch of material to Congress. It will become public soon. And I think people will be sort of stunned at how similar it is to the sort of everyday behavior, which is what makes the behavior so sneaky and so, I think, insidious. But I can assure you there is nothing, we are taking it incredibly seriously now and trying to wrestle with the big philosophical questions that come with that. And I think that's actually, Dan, I wanted to ask you as somebody who's at Berkeley, and I'd love to get the input from everybody on this panel of how you think about defining what is allowable good free speech. I mean, obviously free speech is usually something everyone likes when the person expressing it says something they agree with and don't like when it's an opinion they don't agree with. How do you think about the definition of free speech at Berkeley now? And where is free speech? Where is forbiddable speech, speech that you wouldn't want to allow? And what is speech that's maybe not hateful or violent, but it's inaccurate, and therefore it's fake, and therefore we should try to ban it? How do you think about that at Berkeley? And maybe you could describe for people, give the short version of where things stand with free speech at Berkeley.
So I think the first thing that embedded in your question is something that's erroneous, that there's some degree of discretion for the campus in terms of speech. As we just discussed in the panel discussion we had just prior to this, pretty much all speech is protected. If you want to engage in what's called prior restraint, you pretty much have to show a threat to national security. Hate speech is protected. Harassing speech is protected. I can stand here and say, I think everybody wearing glasses should die. That's protected speech. Now, I can't say that guy right there in the third row with the glasses, we need to kill him right now. And you're getting into true threat. The campus really doesn't have discretion. And what's more interesting, and I think more worrisome when we talk about democracy in the media, is the extent to which provocateurs, like Milo Yiannopoulos and others, are using that knowledge of the law to, in effect, assault universities. We go back to something else you asked earlier about what the similarities are between Trump and Bibi, and one of them is, I think, a very sophisticated use of social media for their base, a base that doesn't want information, it wants affirmation. And Trump's tweet against Berkeley was the 8th most popular tweet of his tenure up until that point. I know for a fact from sources in the White House that they measure that. And it's one of the reasons that Yiannopoulos got $15 million from the Mercer family to start a small institute in Florida training provocateurs, mini Milos, to fan out across the country and basically put universities between a rock and a hard place, knowing that, public universities, knowing that we cannot put a finger on the scale. And you know, we're discovering that there's an inherent tension between the First Amendment and some of the community values that we have. It disrupts people's feeling of safety and belonging and well-being. So, you know, I think the problem goes well beyond just sort of media manipulation and use of social media. It's the use of social media as a weapon and the connivance of a part of the audience in that utilization of social media as a weapon.
Let me ask Yonit and Amos about this same question of free speech. Obviously, there are different norms and laws, in fact, around the world in terms of what's permissible, and that then affects what's allowed to be said on social media and elsewhere. Do you think that in the United States, perhaps the free speech has gone too far or is even overrated at this point, given how much hate is allowed to be expressed in this country?
Okay. She's used to giving orders on TV, so I'll obey. Look, I'm not in a position to grade the U.S. over this, and I think you're way ahead of us, both on the right and the wrong directions. I mean, when I think of your laws and your principles and so on, we only have to learn from them. On the other hand, some of the developments here are troubling. What we have is slightly different. We have the same problems with social media. A lot of the discussion right now has to do with frightening the media, with deterrence against left-wing politicians, against the media in some cases. You see mainstream media a little bit looking behind our backs all the time. And there were cases in the past where journalists were attacked, for instance. Another very specific phenomena that we have recently, I think it was even discussed in the government today, is that there's a huge debate over the rights of organizations who are mostly identified with the extreme left to not only take part in the discussion, but to publish material which embarrasses the state, but especially undermines the moral authority, should we say, of the IDF, of the Israeli army. And right-wing politicians, especially Netanyahu, who is very good at that, are taking advantage of sentiments which are quite widespread. The Israeli army, this is something that I can go on for quite a long time, but I wouldn't. But this is something that close to my area of expertise, so to speak. It has a very important place in the Israeli society, and people love the soldiers. They don't necessarily like the generals all the time, but they love the soldiers. Remember, it's a mandatory, you have to serve in the army. So the 18-year-olds, the 20-year-olds are our children. And therefore, the definition, Israeli politicians have been using that for 15 years. It was an invention by Mofaz, Shaul Mofaz as the chief of staff. He said that the Israeli army was the most moral army in the world, as if there were some kind of moral Olympics and our guy got first. He had the moral high jump and got the best results. But anyway, this is a situation. And even today, Netanyahu attacked these same organizations like Breaking the Silence, who I can critique them quite a lot, and I have a lot of, I have a lot to say about some of their reports and some of their conclusions and so on. But he's attacking them, the prime minister is attacking them specifically because exactly around this issue of free speech, of what you're allowed and not allowed to say, and also a specific Israeli phenomena, who's behind them. And of course, he keeps hinting at is the fact that European governments, for instance, are financing some of this activity. So Israeli organizations from the far left are using freedom of speech to attack our boys, our soldiers, to undermine the morality of our army with the help of anti-Semite Europeans. Okay, so there's quite a discussion over this. I think this is the very specific development which is unique to the Israeli society.
I'm just going to add briefly to that, to what Amos said very wisely. I think the difference between both countries is that Israel is a country that constantly feels like it's under existential threat. And that's important to keep in mind, so that a lot of, when we speak of what is said about, I almost said what is said about journalists, what is said about other people, an issue that comes up a lot is the issue of patriotism. Who is a true patriot? Who is, and it seems like it's narrowing down on only one specific way to be a patriot, only one specific way to love your country, right?
Support our troops, yeah.
Exactly, and it's an interesting thing. We live in a world where we have alternative facts, but there's only one way to be a patriot. So that is something, and it's been targeted specifically at journalists. I think it happens less in this country. Obviously, when the president is saying enemy of the people, it's a big thing to say. But still, I mean, in Israel, what we see a lot is journalists being labeled as unpatriotic, which I think is very dangerous.
Dan, and then Nate.
Yeah, I think we're leaving one group out. We're talking about the politicians, we're talking about the press, but there's another group that has agency here, and that's the audience. To use a slightly different metaphor than Jeff did earlier, I don't think about gatekeepers, but it wasn't that long ago where there were journalistic rabbis, actually, who were back there putting a K for kosher on the news. People didn't even realize it. They were making sure it was accurate, that it was balanced, that it was fair, and we didn't even know it. That's all gone away. Deadlines have gone away. Even the best outlets are not really doing any more independent fact-checking, and so there's a lot of trafe on the market. A good part of the audience is completely happy with trafe. They're completely happy going to outlets that offer no balance. They're completely happy relying on social media outlets because they want, as I said earlier, they want affirmation. And I mean, tell people I've become a radicalized moderate because I've begun to give up. And from where I sit, it's amazing to sit at a place like Berkeley and live a reality that's being scrutinized. And then you really see what the disparity is between how it's portrayed even in the best outlets, not to mention in some of the worst. Like Breitbart, where I don't talk to them anymore because it doesn't matter what I tell them. They're going to write what they want to write. But people are choosing. And I think they're lost to us. It feels to me, based on the letters that we see, that about a third of this country and the right of left have been immunized against the truth. And so if you think about audiences, do we need to give up on the edges and just focus on the middle? But we can't forget the audience decisions that are being made every day.
I mean, you might be right. But I would say, the practice of journalism, I don't think we have the luxury of saying we're writing off a third or a country or 40% of the country. And furthermore, maybe I'm being uncharacteristically optimistic here when I say that empirical reality might just win over time. I mean, no, it's.
Well, who are you and what happened to Jeff?
What?
Who are you and what happened to Jeff? I'm just wondering.
Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Goldstein. Yeah. No, because look, if you're working a hedge fund and you don't make your investments based on your analysis of empirical observable reality, you will lose, right? If you're in tech. And the numbers don't add up, and the algorithms don't add up. The product doesn't work, and eventually you lose.
But if you're in politics,
no. But here's the thing, and this is it's literally a canary in a coal mine. I think, and I hope. Obviously, this is more of a hope than a observation. But I think a lot about the unemployed coal miners of West Virginia. In 2 or 3 or 4 years, when they realize that there are not going to be any more coal mining jobs, do they take in that observation and then take it out on the politicians who made false promises? I don't know. I mean, I hope so. There are a lot of ways to manipulate those people, even more than they've been manipulated, into blaming someone else, the EPA, the left, the media, whatever. But I'm hoping that over time we see people in that population. Yeah, I'm not optimistic about that particular population, but I'm hoping that empirical, that the values of the Enlightenment, that you have to observe something and be able to prove that it's true. I hope that has some salience again.
But what gives you hope over the last, say, 7 years? Because it's not like this is just since the election. The rise of sort of partisan news and the gravitation of so many people through social media into particular echo chambers, and the widespread belief in false propositions. Obviously, I mean, President Obama's birthplace being the sort of paradigmatic example. But I mean, so this has been going on for a while. without, and even if you ask the public opinion survey questions now about some of this stuff that's been disproved long ago, you're still going to get.
Okay, fine. You've beaten the hope out of me. I'll refer you to what I said this morning when I was completely bleak.
Can I just say one other thing, and this is to bring it back to the comparative project, and this is in my role as First Amendment professor, which is that, you know, the U.S. free speech tradition is so far out on a limb as compared to any other country in the world, Israel, but all throughout Europe. And I think that, you know, we're grappling with sort of age-old questions that Europeans had sort of answered in a much more restrictive direction. So Germany has what's known as the fake news bill, right, that was going to, well, make Facebook, Google, and other internet platforms liable for up to 50 million euros for every illegal speech act that occurred on their platform. And so we have, you know, we're really at one end of the spectrum. All the things that you had said about what's legal on a college campus, that gets regulated to the hilt in other countries. At the same time, people start to think of the free speech questions in these online platforms as if they are the government, right? But the rules that Facebook, Twitter, Google, and others abide by are not, when I present them to my First Amendment class, you know, you look at the restrictions on hate speech or misrepresentation or obscenity and the like. If you legislated all of Facebook's terms of service, they would all be unconstitutional. And that's okay. I mean, that's essentially, and for that matter, the pressure that's being put on you by politicians is to go even further, right? To do even more unconstitutional stuff that would be if the state regulated it. However, the problem is you have no option to be a neutral conveyor of news because you make all platforms have to make a decision as to what comes at the top and what comes at the bottom. And so all of the decisions about how to prioritize information as it gets transferred to users are value-laden decisions, even if it's putting a premium on things like virality, right? How something might be popular, right? So that puts a premium on the most spectacular and most sort of likely to be forwarded kinds of information.
That's exactly right. Dan, did you want to jump in on something? Okay, great.
Can I ask you another question?
Sure.
Sorry, she's gonna kill me after. But I mean, talk about that. I mean, you talk about Facebook having the possibility or in practice of ordering the way information is perceived. And I know obviously there's a great allergy to sort of getting in the mix and saying the New York Times is slightly better than the Washington Post, or Washington Post is much better than Breitbart. I mean, the Atlantic should go first, and then I really don't. I don't. But how do you actually? I mean, it's a serious question. How do you actually think this through? Because this is the moment when you're having to think this through. You can make marginal a lot of quote unquote fake news.
It's a huge question for Facebook. And one of the ways that we start to answer it is to think about individuals' choices that they can make in their newsfeed. So you can go and say, I want to see the Atlantic first, right? And so people have a lot of control. Some of that control is explicit. You can go in and click different things to say what you want to see first. If you have friends.
Remember what he said about the tray feeders. Most people out there
aren't. I mean, maybe they are. But I think at the same time, what you're seeing in your subscription rise is that people are starting to think pretty seriously about what it is they want to see. And at the same time, I think people do get to make decisions about what they hold credible, which is why one of the things we're thinking about now is education and digital literacy, and how do you teach people starting at a very young age, or people who are just coming online, how to be responsible consumers, so that we can do our part, but also people have the tools they need. But anyway, individual choice is one piece of it, but we also have the capacity to get signals from people. If people read something or they click on something and then they immediately go back to their newsfeed because they didn't like it or they found it was clickbait, we can take that signal and have it help inform how that story gets treated in other people's newsfeeds. One of the things we started doing since all of the false news around the election is working with third-party fact checkers who can receive pieces of information or stories that people have said or alleged are false. And if they find that it is false, or two or more of them find that it is false, that contributes to having it downranked. And if somebody wants to share a piece that has been found false by the fact checkers, they get a warning. Are you sure you want to share this? So there are ways to kind of take signals from other people, from other users, about how it's consumed, and feed that back into the system. None of this is perfect. Another thing we're doing, though, is context. So if somebody sees a story on a certain topic, be able to show them other stories on a similar topic so they're at least getting alternate points of view. again, none of this is perfect. All of this is something that we're trying it not just in the US, but in other countries. But we've seen a little bit of early success, certainly around the German election. This was something that was on everyone's minds because, with each successive election, we want to make sure we don't have a repeat of the last one. And so we try. This is the classic Silicon Valley thing. You try, you iterate, you learn, you make more improvements. So that is something though that's very much on the minds of the people who are working on newsfeed. Nate, you wanted to jump in.
I mean, the fundamental challenge here is that one of the core values of Facebook is to promote engagement, right? And so you can engage with fake news, you can engage with hate speech, and what is most engaging is what gets prioritized in sort of the communication that you're going to receive. Now, there are bounds that Facebook and other platforms put on this, whether it is, like I said, obscenity, misrepresentation, you can't, advertise guns or pharmaceuticals on Facebook, all kinds of other restrictions. And then the question is, well, how much are you going to restrict this sort of sphere of engagement that people want to sort of participate in the platform? As you said, I mean, one other sort of, I think, innovative thing that Facebook has done recently, and you were hinting at this, is to deprioritize news or information that is forwarded from one user to another that they haven't actually engaged with, right? So one of the big problems is that people will forward stuff off of Facebook, and I see some of my fellow Hausner parents in the room who do this all the time, which is that, that you'll forward something without actually having read it, and so that will then be sort of lower quality information. But the problem with the platform, I mean, so engagement is sort of the sine qua non of Facebook. Relevance is the key thing for Google, right? So that is an echo chamber, right? Everybody complains about the kind of echo chambers that we have in the information ecosystem, but a search engine is about feeding you something based on your characteristics or your previous search history or the like, try to make it relevant to you. That might not be true, that might not be, that could be hate speech. That's sort of the heart of the matter, right? And it's sort of hard to think about how you can sort of trim the edges around the business models of the platform without dealing with these kinds of sort of larger questions directly.
Well, let's talk about the echo chamber, the filter bubble question as it's called. I'm wondering if you all could talk about what an echo chamber or a filter bubble looks like in the Israeli media and in Israeli democracy today. And then maybe we could get to the question of how much of that is human psychology, people wanting to be around like-minded other people and to have that, how much of that is a reflection of the real world, and how much of that has been amplified or exaggerated in the current media climate.
Up to our old tricks. Okay. Look, we're 2 steps behind you on almost everything. Whether it's technology, it's a smaller market. And we copy most of what we know from the American media. But what's quite evident recently, I think I can think of 2 developments. One is Israeli journalists behaving and politicians behaving on Twitter the way they see Americans do. Some people follow Jeff. Some people follow other examples, but it's very, very clear, especially, and these are, there's the old saying, 2 Jews, 3 opinions, or whatever. On Twitter, it's even worse. My sense for years is that nothing good has come up from the combination of Jews and social media. I hope I'm not offending anybody here on the panel.
How could that possibly be offensive?
Yeah. But it's very clear in Israel as well. The fact that, you have to shout hard. Jeff has mentioned that in his opening remarks in the morning, that you need to shout in order to be heard over the noise. And you see that quite a lot, and it's all day long. I follow, I don't tweet myself. I think I'm the last journalist in Israel who doesn't tweet openly. But when you follow this and you follow the discussion, which goes on 24/7, some people, okay, they don't rise as early as the United States president. But other than that, 7 a.m. in the morning, it's already right against left in Israeli Twitter. Yeah. It's us and them and you did and Sharon did and what about almost corruption and what about Sarah Netanyahu and so on. And this is the way it goes, and these are echo chambers, and it's impossible to figure out the mess. And I try to avoid that. I can't. I'm addicted like everybody else, but this is the way it goes. The second thing that's going on, which might be more important, is the fact that some politicians are making a better use of this, of both Facebook and Twitter. And of course, Netanyahu is way, I think Yonit would agree with me, he's 3 steps ahead of everybody else. He's figured that out. Both Jeff and Rabbi Hartman mentioned that, I think, in the morning, talking about the Arabs coming in droves to the ballots in 2015, the personal attacks and so on. And it's not only one. He has all those young spin doctors who are doing a great job if I can look at this cynically for a moment. And they are changing the way the public discussion works. And he can speak to the people without using us anymore. Haaretz is way outside of the Israeli debate by now. But even Channel 2, the biggest, what was it about when he when he had an interview on Channel 20? Mm-hmm. Channel 20 is that small TV channel, the right-wing Israeli Fox that I mentioned. It was just founded about a year or two ago. There was some development regarding the corruption scandals in Israel, and they interviewed him live at, was it 11:40?
He called them at midnight to interview him.
And I think the live interview went on, I think, 10 minutes before midnight, and it turned out that 0.5% of the Israeli people have actually watched it. He didn't care, because these were sympathetic journalists, if you call them journalists, who interviewed him. And the day after that, it was on Facebook, and everybody watched it. And I think Channel 2 broadcasted part of this as well. So he's been very, very good, Nathaniel, with that. He's an extremely effective politician, and he's, of course, way ahead of anybody else. I think Lapid is trying to do the same right now.
I'm just going to add up on that, too. First of all, that really Nathaniel is definitely very effective on his Facebook page. And one example a few weeks ago is that he went on his Facebook page, saying that the Israeli media didn't cover his historic visit to South America.
Why you spend about half an hour.
And we usually, I think it's a question of how to respond to this. And we usually kind of very elegant in saying, okay, that's what he said, and let's continue. But this time we decided to show a clip of just how many times we actually reported on his visit to South America. And there were like 25 reports of our correspondent who went with him. Now, why is this interesting? Because we had the facts. He said there was zero coverage, and we said, no, there was a lot. But the thing is that he won because he made the conversation about the coverage. He made the conversation, he turned it around to, is the media covering him enough? Is the media, and that was the whole discussion that day. So that was one point that should be made. Another thing, you talk about the echo chamber, I think, first of all, obviously it exists in Israel because we have Facebook and Twitter as well, and then the echo chamber sustains itself. I think what happens in Israel, and Amos mentioned this, is that everything has become political. Everything is left and right. Every issue.
Sexual harassment.
Everything. Sexual harassment is an issue of left and right. If, for instance, the general in the army was from a right-wing, has right-wing supporters, and it's suddenly an issue of left and right. And if a soldier shoots a terrorist in the head after he's been neutralized, it's an issue of left and right. It's not morality. It's not anything. Everything has become politics, and Twitter and Facebook just sort of regenerate that all the time.
Like football here. Did you want to?
Yeah, I think here too the idea of an echo chamber. We're sort of leaving the audience out, and we're seeing a desire for an echo chamber on campuses, and it's called platform denial. I mean, it's completely legitimate to do what you need to do to disrupt and shut down a speaker you don't agree with. What does that create? It creates an echo chamber. If we're going to take action as students or as external parties, whether it's the Antifa movement or whatever, and we think by any means necessary is justified to shut down those we don't agree with, we've created an echo chamber. We heard from Ali, the head of Harel at San Francisco State, the way Palestinian students, in the name of free speech, shutting down the hate speech of the mayor of Jerusalem, right? And so all of these, and it's part of political polarization. People are looking for comfort. Echo chambers are comfortable because you'll never be challenged, and you'll never be made uncomfortable. And so I think here too we're seeing this mixing and this back and forth between the media, social media, and then where the public's at. And I'm not sure who's doing what to who in that equation.
Can I just say one thing on that, and this is in praise of Facebook, which is that it's not so clear that the echo chambers that we have on social media, particularly on Facebook, are actually more closed than what we have in our real lives. So when I talk to my students at Stanford about this, I say, well, are you more likely to have a Republican on your Facebook feed, right, or to bump into one on University Avenue? Right? And our online lives are at least as politically diverse as our offline lives. Now, part of the problem is we've had sorting and geographic political segregation and all kinds of other sort of echo chambers in our real lives as well. Our online lives maybe in some respects are moving toward that, but on some social media platforms, we all have that uncle who is politically different than ourselves, who's tweeting or who is posting about different things.
I think I should turn to one of the questions we got from somebody in the audience. This is to Dan. How could you participate in a discussion defining free speech when it is dangerous to walk around with an Israeli flag on the Berkeley campus? I think this gets to the point you've been talking about. Would you want to address that?
I don't believe it is dangerous to walk around the Israeli flag. In fact, last week there were students walking around with the Israeli flag. I think it's actually, if you asked our students from across the spectrum, feel threatened for standing up for what they believe in. That includes Palestinian students, includes Jewish students, it includes Republicans, Berkeley College Republicans, it includes undocumented students. The list goes on. This is part of a larger context, and I don't think it's isolated to the Middle East. This feeling of victimization with incredibly thin skin and a dramatic loss of resilience, if it was even there in the first place. And just to sort of meet it head on, we do opinion polling among our students every year at Berkeley. And in the most recent one, 77% of our Jewish students said that they felt safe, respected, and welcome on campus. And I said to the press that showed we had some work to do. But at the same time, that was 4 points higher than Christian students. That's the context we're living in right now. And here too, I hear an echo of certain types of coverage when people say, well, it must be dangerous walking around on the Berkeley campus with an Israeli flag. And so what goes in my mind immediately is, where did you hear that? What kind of reporting was there? Was there any sort of response from the administration? Was I quoted? Was one of my colleagues quoted? And it's a perfect example. I'm there every day. I'm strongly identified with the Jewish community. And if I thought, folks, that it was dangerous to walk around with the Israeli flag on the Berkeley campus, I'd be doing something about it. But so I think we're both seeing some symptom and some cause, but I can assure you this is not isolated to a particular political group or an ethnic group or a gender orientation or sexual orientation. This is the way students are feeling now across the board, that it feels dangerous to be who they are unless they're part of that sort of silent majority or, they're studying computer science.
I have a really bad idea for a field trip tomorrow, by the way, for this panel. We'll just walk around Berkeley and see what happens. Yeah. Yonit's going first.
There's another question here. Maybe you can take this one, Jeffrey. Bibi and Trump seem to have very different motivations for running for political office and very different political bases. To what extent does that make the comparison more difficult or impossible?
I can't speak to the motivations that they have for running for office or holding office. The problem of analogies is that they're analogies, right? I mean, nothing here is perfect, and the Middle East context is very, very different than the U.S. context. I would say, I think this point is entirely accurate, that I think Bibi has modeled some types of behavior for Trump, and Trump has modeled a lot of types of behavior for Bibi. Remember, I made this point this morning. I come back to this breakpoint moment, at least for me, when he invoked the specter of Arab voters going in droves to the polls. That presaged a kind of Trumpian discourse about minorities, about the use of minorities to scare your base into action. They're facing different sets of issues. They're radically different countries for obvious reasons, but in their behaviors and in what I think of as, at the very least, an indifference to settled norms of democratic political behavior, I think that they have something in common.
Yonit, let me ask you, this is another question from the audience, and I think we're almost out of time, so maybe we can end here. In the Palestinian Authority and other Arab governments, journalists have become agents of the government or else imprisoned. Does that mean there is no hope for true democracy in such places?
Well, listen, I live in Israel, and I, like every Israeli, look around and see the difficulties everywhere around us, but also I look at my family and I see what a miracle Israel is, and the creation of the State of Israel is. And this is all a preamble to say I never lose hope. And no, I don't. I mean, I think it's the problem of Palestinian journalists is an issue. By the way, the fact that we as Israelis can't enter Gaza at all, obviously, and the other parts of the Palestinian territory is also problematic for our work. But I don't think that you can give up hope on democracy ever. I think that it's a problem. I think that the fact that Palestinian journalists, I believe, are not as free as we are in all aspects, not only because of Israel, but also because of what is happening in the Palestinian territories is problematic. But I don't think that giving up hope is the right venue. Jeffrey, would you agree?
Keep hope alive. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, to broaden it out a bit, I mean, this is actually interesting. The question is rooted in a classic neoconservative observation about the world. The Sharansky made this popularized it with George W. Bush. In fact, said that you can't have true peace between a democracy and a non-democracy, and therefore the prerequisite to a peace treaty between Israel and the Palestinians would be a democratic. It's an interesting argument. There might be something to that. One of the things we learned in the Arab Spring is that the populations of countries like Egypt, Tunisia, Yemen, Syria were not actually obsessed, as their leaders told us they were, with the depredations, with the perfidiousness of the Israelis. They were actually upset most with the quality of their own leaders. I mean, I'm not hopeful for peace for 7 or 8 reasons. One of them has got to be the fact that the Palestinian polity is divided and frequently wars with each other. They're in a reconciliation mode this week. They might not be next week. Amos would know this better than I. But they're not settled in their identities and in their commitment to one form of government or another, or the role that religion is going to play. So I don't think anything is. I don't think peace. I think peace is possible. I don't think it's available right now, but I think it's possible. But I think this is one of the questions we do have to look at long term. Is until Arab states and the Palestinians decide for themselves who they are, it's going to be very, very hard to figure out what to do at the negotiating table. By the way, the Israelis have to figure some of this stuff out as well.
Peace is possible. That seems like a good note to end on. Thank you.